1. So for context, I'm a lab technician and work in the diagnosis laboratory of a big hospital from my country. I got my job here at the end of 2020 when they put up a facility in my city's international airport since COVID testing was needed for travel, and they thought it would be a good idea to offer a service for travelers that needed a negative report for COVID in order to travel that could be collected right there and released in a couple of hours faster than you could in any other healthcare facility, as we were there specifically for this only. Although when word got out, people went just to be tested, as we did a pretty good job on releasing results within an hour or so, opposed to hospitals which were packed at the time, still. I worked the night shift, which was full of work until about midnight, and movement would fall, as the last flight left about 3 a.m., and then we would pretty much be free to do whatever we wanted. Usually there wasn't much to do, since the machine did pretty much all the work. Negative results would be automatically released, while the positive ones we would need to check if they were within acceptable range, meaning safe enough so people wouldn't be transmitting COVID, and passengers could either request for a printed report or pick it up on the hospital's app. For those of you who aren't familiar with real-time PCR testing, basically the machine does cycles in order to duplicate the amount of genetic material in the analyzed sample. It does so by having a fluorescent probe that is released after a certain gene is duplicated, and it can be picked up by the sensors after a certain threshold, hence the name cycle threshold, or CT for short, which is the amount of cycles that the machine needed to detect a certain portion of genes is present in a given sample. It's a bit more complex than that, but I think that's enough for you all to understand what a low CT, less cycles, more positive, and high CT, more cycles, less positive means. What about negative samples? Well, the machine does a minimum of 45 cycles per sample, so if it doesn't duplicate by then, you're good to go. And this takes about an hour and a half to be completed, so it's pretty fast. In case it was positive, the machine released the results in about 20 minutes, and it didn't need the full cycles to detect the virus genetic material. We also offered the antigen quick tests, which I guess most people are familiar with now. It's less sensitive than PCR testing, meaning if you come out as positive with it, you're basically a walking virus incubator. This one takes about 15 minutes to be done, or less, if you're really positive, as the strip gets read immediately, if you're really sick. If you're self-testing and it gets read immediately, you don't have to wait, you pretty much have COVID. But we left it for the full 15 minutes since that's what the manufacturer recommends before releasing the result. Now, for the story. I think this happened in the beginning of 2021, when the US borders opened up for traveling again, and it was packed most of the days as lots of people rescheduled their trips to Disneyland, mostly. It's pretty much everyone's dream here, to that period. We were used to people from the front desk coming over to the lab and asking us to prioritize certain individuals. Some were Karens, some were genuinely desperate, or some of them invented a sub-story, like we're going on our honeymoon, etc. And although they should not come to a lab with possible COVID-positive samples, it didn't stop them. I used to joke to them, well, if they want to pass their test to come out positive, positives come out in about 20 minutes. Or would the passenger want some extra fries with that, and whatnot. Sometimes when it was packed, we couldn't process more than 48 samples per round, since this was all the machine could receive, and PCRs would take up to 2 hours. We advertised the tests to be released in up to 3 hours, but it rarely came to that, unless we needed to repeat someone's test. Enter our Karen. It was a packed day. Tuesday, when the flights are cheaper for some reason and people were nuts, as the lines for testing were spiraling around the departure terminal. I arrived at 7 p.m. to start my shift, met my friend outside. We smoked before entering and saw the huge line, seeing we would have a busy day, and little did we know what was about to unfold. The day shift passed to us that there was a passenger who was ballistic waiting for hers and her family's quick tests, since she had already rescheduled this trip 3 times and blah blah blah. I put my protective gear and processed her sample, as it's pretty simple to do so, and lo and behold, it was an instant positive, while her families were all negative. I called my shift partner and we looked at each other with that oh shit face as someone from the front desk, Amanda, with whom I had a great friendship by the way, asked if it was ready, as the woman was already starting to get annoyed. It had passed exactly 5 minutes since they collected and her sample was in our lab. Well, we might have a problem. Why? I picked up Karen's strip and asked Amanda to take a look, and I could see her expression changing. Is that Karen's test? Yep. And that's a quick test and it's a positive. Seemed to me she was in denial or something. Yep. What should I do? What about the family? Looks like they're gonna be negative and hers is positive. Well, there's nothing we can do, darling. Can't you retest it? I was already getting annoyed myself at this point, as it was packed and there were lots of other samples to process. We could, but it would be a waste to do so. But it could come out negative, couldn't it? I put my hands together, took a deep breath and responded, Amanda, darling, she could be Mother Teresa or Obama, and I would still release a positive result. There's nothing we can do, and with this result it would be pretty much negligent and insensitive on our part to the world situation. Just remember to stay away from her while talking to her. Just for context, sometimes the strip gets a really faded red result, which by the manufacturer kit's instructions is still a positive. But we repeated those tests on the sample to see if it happens again, and we released the second result, as it may not come out positive. I know, it's wrong, in my humble opinion, but our hospital's doctors said it was okay, so we went with our orders. She shrugged, accepted her fate, and left. I released the positive result, and as expected, a minute goes by, and then Bill enters the lab, with me already knowing what this is about. Karen's going ballistic, dude, saying it's impossible for her to be positive while her family's negative. And she's visiting her father regularly and he has cancer. She's demanding we release her a negative report. We cannot do that, you know that. Can't you retest so it might come out negative? I explained to him again why that wasn't going to happen. But I said we could offer her and the family a free PCR test, which would take longer, was more expensive, but that it would definitely come out positive for her anyways. I did that as it happened quite frequently, and it was merely to protect ourselves legally in case someone sued the hospital. Most of the time they did sue, as I found out through my boss later, as PCR is a more sensitive test and the gold standard when it comes to COVID. He said okay and called in saying Karen was annoyed but accepted the free PCR and demanded it was released fast. I call my boss at this point and give him the heads up, but that would impact the rest of the passengers' tests since we would have to use 4 spaces in the machine for her family alone. He understood and gave me the green light. Well, as I explained at the beginning of the post, Karen's test took about 20 minutes to be analyzed by the machine. Her CT was 12. It was probably the record for lowest CT we've ever had at that place. And 20 minutes later, her husband would come out as 28, and their kids would be 30-ish. Like I said, quick tests regularly wouldn't detect lower viral burdens, but 30-ish would be acceptable for traveling, according to the hospital's doctors. So basically, either the kids and husband were getting better and passed it to Karen, or Karen passed it to the rest of the family and were getting sicker. This is why the countries made obligatory testing when travelers arrived at their final locations, since in the airport, with no clinical history, we cannot attest if it is the initial or final phase, and in some hours until the arrival, the viral burden may increase or decrease. So basically, I had to release her and hubby as positives, and the kids were negative. You think a normal person would simply accept and leave, but not Karen. 2 minutes go by, and Amanda enters sobbing in the lab. What happened, Amanda? She explained to me while sobbing hard. She's fluffy and soft cotton candy. You see, anything gets her crying. But Karen was throwing a tantrum, calling her names, you know the drill. And Amanda asked me if any of us could go out there and try to reason with her. Even though you can't argue with these people, and all of my cells are telling me not to, I went out as I can't stand seeing a friend crying because of some Karen. Put on my white coat and see this woman screaming and cursing, as I was already rolling my eyes and shaking my head, but little did I know. I maintained my distance since I knew she was positive and started speaking. Mrs. Karen. Finally, someone with a white coat. Can't you tell these morons that this test is wrong and your hospital is forcibly making us good citizens lose our dreams? All of this while getting uncomfortably close to me while I tried to take a few steps back.
Yeah, you're running the vacation for us and our kids. We demand that you correct your results.
Sir, I can't. Redo it now. You only want to make us pay money to redo these tests.
Yes, you only want our money and are bitter because we can travel and you don't.
We offered you a free PCR. We retested you already.
See, disgraceful. You Chinese think you're so much better than us.
In my country, people have this horrible habit to call Asians either Chinese or Japanese, because that's all there is in East Asia for them. I'm trying to maintain calm. I didn't say anything. The machine tested you and you're positive. How come our kids aren't positive? That's impossible. Sir, your kids might have it. They could have gotten it from you or the other way around. I'm not allowed to say the exact CT to them, according to the hospital's policy. Only the physicians and us from the lab have access to that.
Don't you dare say my kids or me are responsible for this.
I'm not. The virus is responsible for this.
No, you're all inventing the virus to ruin our economy while we hard workers are trying to fix it up. You don't have any symptoms. I visited my father recently who has cancer and he didn't get it.
Ma'am, you know that's not how it works.
Are you calling me stupid?
In my head, yes.
No, ma'am. Then give me my negative test.
I can't. You both have already been reported to health surveillance and your passport's banned for 10 days from traveling. You did what? Undo it now. We're doing our test somewhere else and you'll be sorry. We will sue you. Sir, I don't have that power.
You're a disgrace to this country. You people should have been razed to the ground by the US. Then you wouldn't have invented the virus to fuck up the world and earn money at the expense of us Westerners.
Excuse me?
You heard me.
And then Karen spat right in my face and my eyes.
What the fuck? Now here's your virus. Enjoy it.
I stood there motionless, processing what had just happened. Go back to your filthy continent. By this point, security showed up and escorted them to the HS office. I cleared myself and continued working for the rest of the night. As COVID takes a few days to show up and be transmittable, and kept testing myself after a few days to see if I started getting sick, and I ended up being asymptomatic. After this episode, my boss ordered that none of us from the lab got out. He was worried people would follow us to the parking lot and do these kind of things. Got myself 15 days at home in this story, but the second time I contracted it would be much worse. That's a story for another time. 2. So, about 15-ish years ago, I moved to my current town, had a job that soon went bankrupt, and to make ends meet in a down economy, I found a job doing restaurant work, which honestly I had never done, but bills gotta get paid. So the owner, RJ, a rich jackass, brings me in to do some business side of the restaurant functions, while helping out front of house and back of house. As the owner doesn't know how to handle working around low-paid restaurant workers, he is constantly losing people. I have a guy that several of my friends know that has a culinary degree and needs a job. He's a bit of a condescending loser. I end up helping him get a job, and he quickly becomes kitchen manager. In terms of running the restaurant, we're set as virtually equal in power behind RJ. But condescending loser has a culinary degree. He wants to talk to me like I have no idea what I'm doing working in a restaurant. The other character in this story is the owner's troublesome sister, the meddling brat. To save time, here's a brief snapshot of why I needed to exact revenge. In condescending loser's case, I had managed to sell a $12,000 catering deal. I prospected the company, put the whole package together. All I needed was the purchase card number for the order. I explained this to condescending loser, who insists that I go home since my shift was over, and that he would write the number down for me. Next morning, RJ tells me how condescending loser just managed to sell a $12,000 catering, and gave him a $500 bonus. I tried to explain that I sold it, I had witnesses that I sold it, but RJ wouldn't believe them. In meddling brat's case, I would often work open-to-close shifts at the restaurant. I liked them because I was wholly responsible for every component of the day. As such, there was no other manager on duty those days. I noticed that on those days, meddling brat would come into the office carrying a book. She would lock herself in the office and 20 minutes later leave with the book. My cash box, on last count, would always be missing exactly $50. I informed RJ of this, and he insisted I was miscounting, because all meddling brat had to do if she needed money was to ask him. I suggested to him that she may be buying things she doesn't want him to know about, like drugs. He immediately tells her what I have said, and she becomes livid with me. So, my PettyRevenge. One day I come into the office for a closing shift and notice one of the tabs on the internet browser has a dating site. Curious, I click and learn that Condescending Loser has a profile. I get a fond thought and decide to see if Meddling Brat is also on there, and she was. Condescending Loser is a chubby, bald white guy who loves Japan, new iPhones, and the Yankees. Meddling Brat happens to be of Filipino descent and looks Asian. Now, these two don't like each other at all. So what I do is create two profiles, one of an Asian girl wearing a Yankees hat, and one of a preppy-looking guy in a hoodie that shares common interests from Meddling Brat's profile. I send connections to Meddling Brat and Condescending Loser from the fake profiles, and watched each of them fawn over the conversations. I got them to agree to a date where they would meet at the theater. As it works out, I get Meddling Brat to tell me what she will be wearing to this blind date, and I tell her I will have a rose for her. I message Condescending Loser and tell him to have a rose, and tell him to look for the outfit that Meddling Brat said she would be wearing. The next day, RJ calls everyone into a morning meeting demanding to know who set up a date for Meddling Brat and Condescending Loser. I smartly never told his soul I had done that, so no one else knew to blame me. I laughed my butt off in the car when I left, based on the text messages from other employees. They did too, as they also despised the both of them. 3. For some background, I work at a Panera Bread, and I've been working here for a little more than 1.5 years. Pre-COVID, Panera Bread stores had an assortment of pastries, baked goods, and optional side choices of bread that you can pick instead of the French baguette piece. Many of these options or baked goods were removed during and after COVID restrictions due to the global shortages. Technically, at my Panera branch, we are not supposed to give a slice of bread on the side instead of a French baguette. But our managers are insistent on it even after said changes. There's a button we can use that is labeled as $1 bread slice, which is 99 cents at my store, but I've been told not to use that button for customer orders. Essentially, 2 older women came in during my shift and everything was going well until I asked the first lady if she wanted bread on the side of her entree. She had asked for an Asiago focaccia slice, which I replied with sorry, but we stopped serving a slice of bread on the side other than a baguette. She immediately assumed full Karen mode and told me that she has always gotten it on the side of her food for the 12 years she has known this place. I told her that the store had changed that option before we moved to the new location, which happened more than 2 years ago. She started fuming and asked to speak to the manager in charge. Our GM, T, was right next to me using the tablet to help another worker log onto the pantry app to watch a video on C2 changes coming this spring. I got his attention and the first woman snarkily asked him if she could get a slice of the Asiago bread instead of the French baguette piece, which he replied, "Yes." I was annoyed with his response, but I kept a straight face. I was about to ring the bread slice up using the special instructions option, when the co-worker with T came up to my register and was showing me how to ring in the bread slice of their choice. She was using the $1 bread slice button, which would charge the customer 99 cents instead of using special instructions. And I was trying to tell my co-worker that we couldn't put it in like that. The second woman butted in and replied while smirking,
"You can't do something that a manager just said you could do."
I honestly decided to just not explain anything to her because both of them were being rude and getting on my nerves, so I let my co-worker ring them up, and they got charged $1.98 plus tax on the 2 slices of bread they wanted. They never came back to complain about getting charged over $2 for just 2 slices of bread, so I assumed that they were either fine with it or didn't want to interact with me because I was trying to help save them money. Either way, they paid more than they should have. And before anyone gets uptight about what I said above, there are multiple reasons why we shouldn't allow people to get their bread slice instead of the French baguette, or other side choice. 1, allowing them to do it once will make them come in with their friends and or family to ask for the same thing, and if an associate refuses, they will use the "May I speak to your manager" card. 2, literally every bread we have on the line is meant only for the line. Constantly asking for a slice of whatever kind of bread will make it more difficult for you or the other customers to get the sandwich on the proper bread. There are many customers that will not order their food because the bread they want is unavailable, which ruins the experience for everyone. And 3. I'm so tired of hearing the excuse, "I've been here for so many years and I've never had this response before." Customer, please calm down. I have literally been here since the relocation of this Panera store. Shouldn't I know how this store operates more than you who comes in every once in a blue moon? That and just making the statement is pure entitlement. I can always understand being upset that an option you enjoyed or an entree you always got was removed. But we literally shouldn't make an exception for you just because you think you're hot stuff. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. 4. This happened about 4 years ago. I work as a city letter carrier for the US Post Office, and this incident involved a house on my route at that time. John had been renting the house for over 10 years at this point, and despite his son offering to have him come live with him and his family, John was content to keep living in his house. It was in a poorer, rougher part of town. Drug dealers, gunshots, the occasional killing. Wasn't a very nice house, but it was home for him. And he paid the rent on time every single month. Basically a model tenant. One day, John tells me he's finally going to move out because the landlord is trying to screw him over. I asked, how so? And he told me that a water pipe that runs under the house has sprung a leak. I asked how he would know that, to which he replied, "I got a $700 water bill this month." So John had called the landlord to let him know about it, that the landlord needed to take care of the problem and the bill. The landlord refused, insisting that John was responsible for the water bill, despite it being an issue with the house that fell under the landlord's responsibilities. And if John didn't pay it, he was going to be evicted. Well, John had an out. He had a family that wanted him to come live with them, so that's exactly what he did. And the landlord was stuck with the bill. The landlord clearly had the money to pay the water bill because after John moved out, he not only fixed the water pipe, he spent a good bit of money fixing the house up too, presumably to make it more attractive to other renters, maybe to charge more rent, I don't know. What I do know is that he got the house rented again pretty soon after he finished the work. A group of 4 people moved in, rough-looking sort. Guess they paid their rent on time as they were there for a couple of months. Until their meth-making equipment turned over one night and burned the house out. It was still standing, but it was condemned by the city and remains empty to this day. Tried to screw over an honest and decent man, ended up losing his house. Best part was, John would occasionally drive down the street to check out his old house, so he knew exactly what happened, and we exchanged smiles every time we saw each other, until I moved on to another route. 5. When I was younger, especially throughout middle school, I dealt with bullying and toxicity constantly. This situation happened when I was in 7th grade. During that time, I was progressively bullied by a group of kids I will call the Goonies. I'm not a small person, and I have never been. Around that time, I was around 5'11", 150 pounds. Although I'm big for my age, I have never been one to fight back. I have impulse control issues and ADHD, so when I get worked up, I have a hard time calming down or I go overboard. Even so, I can mostly hold back my emotions when on medication. The Goonies, a group of kids who constantly made my life hard throughout my school experience. The group comprised of 5 or 6 kids, mostly small and on the football team, but due to their numbers they had an advantage over most people in my school. They preyed consistently on people who were without a group. Most of the time they just took a few items during lunch and asked for money from others. On the bad days they would fight others and take whatever they wanted. They had been preying on me and my group of friends for a while, mostly taking things and food. This time was different, though. I had worn my grandfather's chain and cross to school I had gotten as inheritance when he passed a week before. When I tell you it meant a lot to me, it did. My grandfather was my pride and joy. We had the best relationship, as my father was mostly out of town working. He has never been in the best health, but he got lung cancer a few months before and passed on. The chain was all I really had, besides some model train sets and a ukulele. That day I wore my chain to remove some of the grief I was feeling from his passing, to make it through the day. My friends knew about the passing and were trying to comfort me throughout the day. But the one class I don't have with them was gym, and in our school we are required to remove jewelry before class. That part was uneventful. The problem was, when I went back into the locker room, all of the goons had gym period after, and I would see them as I was in the locker room. As I walked in and took my chain out of my locker, one of them took notice, and immediately asked what I had in my hand. I, of course, wanting not to cause problems, said nothing important. I went to the bathroom to put it on, and when I walked out, all of them were waiting for me. They started to tell me to give them what was around my neck. In the moment, I was on the verge of tears because I didn't want to lose one of the only things I had left to remember my grandfather. So I made a run for it. They blocked the door and started punching and kicking me. I didn't want to cause a fight because I knew it would get out of hand, and I, up until then, had a perfect school record. When they stopped, I sat up and started to try and leave. The main gunny, the leader of the pack, grabbed the chain and ripped it off of me, breaking it and mangling the cross that my grandfather took such pride in. He started laughing as I stared at him in pure disbelief. I saw red. I lost it and started pummeling the main kid, grabbing him by his collar and smashing his head over and over again into the concrete, while his friends watched screaming to stop and trying to pry me away. The gym teacher heard all of the commotion. I don't know how he didn't hear me getting jumped before, and came in running, yanking me away from the main gun and locking me in his office. He called the nurse and an ambulance. He was freaking out. I got suspended for 3 months. Only due to cameras in the hall that could see into the window of the door, it witnessed them jumping me, I didn't get arrested. Thank God for technology. The bully suffered a fractured skull, broken nose, broken jaw, 8 lost teeth, and severe brain damage. He was out for 4 months with some time in the hospital. He didn't make it back onto the football team due to his fear he would get hit. His grades also took a hit, and he had to repeat 2 years. My group, on the other hand, had been bullying free ever since. So what do you guys think? Did I take it too far, or was it deserved? Let me know in the comments. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 243. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use your stories in this video. Please do boink the like button before you go. Thank you kindly. I did have a little bit of a debate about the last story, but I think it's important to remind bullies out there that the quiet kid is only quiet until they aren't. Alright, so let's see. Moving on to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is: cute little kitschy weirdo items that you like but will never buy. Like those little water-drinking birds. I think they're kind of cool. Will never buy one. The frame with all the pins in it that takes an impression of whatever you push into it. All that sort of gadgety stuff. I love that. I will never buy any of it. Because I don't feel in my mind I can justify the cost. Because I can spend it on something I'll get more use out of. And I'll probably enjoy more. Is there anything you feel the same about? I'd love to see your answers in a comment below. With that, I'm going to head off for now. And record more videos, actually. So until next time, thank you very much for listening. And take very good care of yourselves.